Hey, it's Kley. Welcome to another video. This is going to be a project overview and explanation walkthrough of a guitar amplifier that I just built, and it's a really fun project. Also had a lot of challenges. I just wanted to share with you, walk through it kind of in some depth and detail. And, there'll also be other videos that follow this with some tone clips, so if you want to hear how it sounds, subscribe, keep posted for those. But this video, I'm going to go kind of an overview of the project and how it worked and what's going on here. And so let's just dive right in. This was a amplifier from a Hammond organ, model AO-29. Now, I'm a little bit confused still about the whole history and lineage of the Hammond organs amplifiers. There are a lot of different kinds, and a lot of them are tube-driven, and so they make for excellent projects for conversions to guitar amps. I believe Dr. Z, like the early Carmen Gia or some of those circuits, are rumored to have been made from old Hammond amplifiers. And the reason that I was drawn to and attracted to this, first of all, is because I think it's a really cool project. Taking something that's really old and giving it some new life, I think is really interesting. Second of all, a lot of the stuff that they use in these amplifiers is really, really high quality stuff. And it is stuff that is typically the most expensive individual components of any amplifier built. And I'm talking about the chassis and the transformers. Those are made out of metal. I believe these transformers are just big hunks of iron. And then the chassis, is I don't know if it's rolled steel or something, but, we're talking about these significant metal pieces. And metal doesn't really wear out. Parts of an amplifier, like the capacitors, will wear out, the resistors will wear out, the tubes will wear out, the pots will wear out, but the switches. But these big hunks of metal really don't wear out in the same way, and so they make for excellent conversions. Second of all, they're relatively cheap. I think I got this initial chassis for about $40 on eBay. Now, I will let you know that the lower the prices go, the more work that goes into it. But, there's a big range. Now, I specifically was looking for, if they're a little bit dirty, that really wasn't so bad for me. With some sandpaper and, a good scrubbing and cleaning, these things will really shape up nicely. And actually, I kind of like a little bit of the natural patina. The transformer and the chassis, I didn't go all the way. I took some sandpaper basically and gave it a nice good scrubbing and cleaning. So getting a dirty amplifier is not so bad. Second of all, I would specifically look for ones that aren't working, because that typically means that part of the circuit is broken or something. And I actually gutted the entire stock circuit and took it all out anyways. So whether or not it's working is actually irrelevant to me. And the likelihood of a transformer being the problem, I think, is pretty low, given the fact that there's tubes and capacitors and resistors. We're talking about maybe a 56-year-old amp. And then third is typically how many tubes does it come with? Now, one of the amps that I bought, this one, didn't come with any tubes. I also bought a second one, which is sitting right over there, that'll turn into another guitar amp sometime soon. And that one came with a bunch of tubes. And actually, some of the tubes have been okay, and some of them really haven't worked so well. And I think that's just kind of a mad guess. But I guess my thought is, if it comes with tubes, great, but I'm going to try to look for the more inexpensive prices, just because that's what I wanted. So anyways, for about $40, I got a chassis and I got transformers. Now, for this project, which is a Plexi style amp, a chassis might run $80 or $90. A power transformer might be $100. An output transformer might be $80. So we're talking about almost $300 in parts there, and which I got for about $40. So as far as the economy goes, this project is off to a great start. And then everything else past this is small parts. So I got the rest of these parts from Hoffman amplifiers. They're 6v6 Plexi kit. That was kind of the inspiration for this. So this amp is pretty much a Marshall Plexi at this point. So anyways, really, really fun project. Now what I want to do is go ahead and take a close-up look at the amp and talk through what I did, and then we will kind of go from there as far as the challenges that I faced and the circuit that I chose, and maybe some of the modifications that I will try to make to it as well. So let's keep moving. All right, so taking a closer look at the chassis, you can see I actually had to do a fair amount of work to try and clean this bad boy off. you know, much of the chassis, you can see some of the brown marks in here. There was definitely, you know, this transformer's got some marks here. Sandpaper was really what I used to de-rust this sucker. Now, next, I basically took everything out, and you know, all of these tube sockets, all these pots, the input jack, the power switches, everything was new. Now, I don't even know if that was completely necessary. I think it's possible, you know, like these tube sockets that came with them, with a good cleaning, they probably could have been serviceable. But I just decided to go totally fresh and new and clean. And yeah, like I said, the only thing I really kept was the chassis and these two transformers. So let's just kind of walk through what this amp has. Huge, beefy power transformer. And actually, this, you can see all the tube slots that I didn't even fill. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4 other tube slots in there, and maybe even some of these too, where there were a lot of tubes that come into this amp stock. And so this power transformer is driving a ton of current to all these tubes. And actually, with my project, I ended up bumping this thing up to 6L6s, just because my plate voltages were pretty high. And so, which I'll get into in a little bit later. Now, but other than that, we've got a 5U4 rectifier. Now, the Hammond, or the Hoffman project calls for a solid state rectifier. I chose this because I need some voltage drop. My voltage would be extremely high without it. And so I'm using a tube rectifier. Now I have two 6L6GC power tubes. And actually I might even try to do EL34s at some point to just turn it into a legit 50 watt Plexi. Then we've got 12AX7s in the preamp. We've got our, this first one over here covers those first two preamps, the bright and normal channel. Then we've got our tone stack driver here, and then we've got our long tail phase inverter, long tail pair phase inverter third. And so we've also got a nice cap can here, which is a JJ, and I think it's one of those 40, 20, 20, 20. We've got a choke. Then on the front panel, here we've got our fuse right here. I included just a single on-off switch, no standby for me. And then I have this red pilot light indicator, which actually works pretty nice. Then we've got our input way over here, and I had to get a little bit improvisational with using some screen wire that I had left over from some other project to help me mount that, which was kind of a nice touch, I thought. Then we actually have normal and bright gain controls here. Now I chose to internally jumper the normal and bright channels. So it's as if you are jumpered into both channels all the time, into the high inputs, and then they run in parallel with one another. And then yeah, you just control the volume there, and you mix and match however you want. Then we've got a master volume here at the end of the preamp. This is not a post-phase inverter, this is pre-phase inverter. And then treble, mid, bass. I took the presence out because I was having some problems with that part of the circuit, which I'll get into in a little bit. But I haven't really felt the need to put it back in. And so that covers our controls on the front. And now we have the rear panel, and this thing is dead simple. We've got an IEC power cable, and then we've got a speaker output jack. Now I do have a switch here to go between 4 and 8 ohm speaker outputs, and I currently have it on the 8 ohm output. So very, very simple rear of the amplifier. All right, let's take a look at some gut shots. Now this is not the prettiest amp I've ever built, but I will show it off anyways. I want to start over here at the power section. We've got a big power transformer. Now, one of the things that I did when I did the conversion and would highly recommend is when you're taking the amp apart, take detailed notes and pictures of where different things are coming from. So for example, with these wires coming out of the power transformer, take detailed notes about what came out from where and what goes where. It'll help your life out tremendously. Now, with this power transformer, in this amp, there's a kind of a weird series of things going on in different speakers and different drivers, and I mean, it's a strange setup. So to drop the voltage down, I guess this is a center tap here, connected to this really big, like 50 watt resistor rated at 820 ohms. Sorry, it's a 720 ohms. And that's to kind of help mimic some of those other components going on. I think it's maybe a field coil speaker or something, or you know, just to help compensate for all the other tubes in the amp that I'm not using in this build, just to try to help get my voltage down a little bit. Definitely something that was required. So this is a center tap, I believe, from the high voltage, and it's going through the resistor and then being grounded. We've got our power cord, three-prong power cord here. Then like I said, we've got our power switch on off and our fuse to kind of complete the input section of the power. Then we actually have a, and then, you know, we have the rest of the amp. You know, our output, speaker output here. We've got some wires here going to this rectifier, tube rectifier. Here's the back of our output impedance switch and our two power tubes. Output transformer, capacitors. Right here we've got a little node here for the power stage grounding, to kind of try to collect those to one spot. If you have any questions about grounding, I would refer you to Merlin Blenco. I believe he's got an article on his website. It's really good about grounding. And definitely something that I would recommend to try to help keep your amp quiet is to kind of segment your grounds into a preamp stage that is connected towards the input of the amp, and then your power section stage is over here closer to the power transformer. And I think that's something that has definitely helped with the amp. Then if we move over here over to our preamp side, you can see we've got our circuit board over here on the left, and our V1, V2, V3 preamp tubes. Here's our input over here. I've got a preamp ground butt wire going right here, kind of floating in the air, and then connected right here by the input jack. And then all my preamp grounds are connected to that and helping to stabilize that. One of the things that I may try to work with is to kind of clean up some of this wiring in here. The lead dress is probably not ideal. I do have some long parallel continuous runs that are kind of floating in and out everywhere, and so organizing that a little bit would probably be helpful. But also paying attention over here to these preamps sections. This is really, any noise that is picked up in the preamp is especially sensitive because it's going to get amplified through the rest of the circuit. So just something to really keep aware of. With this build, I definitely ran into some challenges. First and foremost was getting these transformers to work with this amp. And the biggest thing was this power transformer put out a lot more voltage than I was expecting. You know, a 6v6 Plexi from Hoffman expects to use the 18 watt style transformers, and this bad boy is putting out like 465 volts on the plates, even after some of this resistance, even after the tube rectifier. So I mean, it's a really powerful transformer putting out a lot of voltage, and so I had to kind of adjust my circuit a little bit, and ultimately have gone up to the higher powered 6L6 power tubes. So just something to keep in mind. Next, when I was building this amp, I definitely ran into some trouble at one point, and one of the things I just want to recommend as far as troubleshooting an amp, one of the things I did is I just took a break. Sometimes I think you kind of get, when you're in the amp building mode and you're in debugging, troubleshooting mode, you kind of get so focused on what you're doing that you kind of tunnel zone on different things. And actually, towards the end of that troubleshooting, initially I had started doing more harm than good. And I kind of located some trouble on the phase inverter area and the negative feedback area. And so I took out the presence, took out the negative feedback, and so then the amp stopped working altogether. And at that point I didn't know if I had a bad solder joint or if I had one of these old transformers was not good. I had no idea what was going on. But I had ended up doing more harm than good with that kind of guesswork troubleshooting when I really should have just taken a break. So I put the amp down for a little while, got busy with some other things, and then eventually got refocused, came back with a fresh set of eyes, and that was really helpful to completing the project. Second, my two big tips as far as debugging an amp, and this probably could deserve its own video, but the first would be taking voltages at the tubes. And that is really where, if you've got, My preamp tubes, V1, V2, were always giving me good voltages, but it was more in the phase inverter and the power section and the rectifier that I was having trouble. So voltages is really going to help you narrow down and focus. You know, if you're getting good, healthy voltages at a certain point in the amp, you know that's not your problem. And then secondly, what I did is I actually took my multimeter, and I would just poke at the contacts on the tubes. And again, it's following safe amp practices to make sure that I wasn't endangering myself, but poking at the connection points on these tubes, and the idea is that the tubes are really the heart of the amp, and the circuit comes into V1, goes up, you know, it's constantly bouncing back and forth between the circuit board and the actual tubes themselves. So you need to be able to read the schematic and tell which connection points on the tubes will carry signal, but once I was able to do that, then I could locate, you know, you start at the back, start at the output jack, and then go towards the input, and that can really help you identify, okay, it's good, we're getting, you know, you should get little pops. And then as you go towards the input, the pops should get louder and louder and louder. And I got to a point where I wasn't getting pops, or I wasn't getting the proper voltage, and that was at the phase inverter. So then I knew, okay, my problem is here, let's go back in and take a look. It just kind of helped me to focus my troubleshooting. So there you have it. Also, I just want to give a huge shout out to the guys on the TDPRI amp forum. Those guys are awesome, and I really couldn't have done this build without them. I had a lot of questions, and they had a lot of expertise. So overall, really cool build.